In court, my husband leaned over to his attorney, chuckled out loud, and whispered, "Look at her. She couldn't even afford a lawyer." The room filled with low snickers from his wealthy family, all convinced they were about to wipe me out completely. My husband thought he'd successfully stripped me of my dignity, my home, and my future. But he made one critical mistake. He assumed my silence over the last 3 years was weakness, rather than patience. When the judge entered, he didn't look at my husband's high-priced legal team. He looked straight at me, cleared his throat, and asked, "Will the lead counsel for the state's Financial Crimes Division please state her name for the record?" The laughter in that courtroom died instantly. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Clara Vance. At 28 years old, I stood alone outside courtroom 3B, clutching a worn leather folder against my chest. The polished marble walls of the county courthouse reflected the morning sun, casting long, sharp shadows across the floor. Just a few feet away, my husband, Julian, stood surrounded by his elite, high-priced legal team. Tailored suits, leather briefcases, and smiles that whispered absolute certainty. To anyone watching, it looked like a lion preparing to tear apart a lamb. Julian's family had always viewed me as an outsider, someone quiet, ordinary, and easily managed. For 3 years, Julian had systematically worked to isolate me. He kept our finances behind locked doors, subtly convincing me that I was entirely dependent on him while quietly shifting our joint assets into private accounts. He thought he had played the long game perfectly. As the heavy oak doors opened, Julian leaned over to his lead attorney, chuckled out loud, and whispered, "Look at her. She couldn't even afford a lawyer." His lawyer smirked, jotting down a quick note while Julian's brother stifled a chuckle. They genuinely believed I was walking into that room completely helpless, ready to surrender everything we had built. What Julian didn't realize was that my silence over the last 3 years was never weakness. It was patience. I took a deep breath, adjusted the file under my arm, and walked into the courtroom with an unmistakable sense of calm. To the outside world, our marriage was a postcard of perfection. Julian was the charismatic rising star in commercial real estate, and I was his devoted wife, quietly supporting his ambitious climb. He bought me expensive dresses for charity galas and presented our life as a fairy tale. But behind closed doors, the reality was far colder. Julian controlled every dollar, every account, and every narrative, making sure I stayed neatly tucked away in his shadow. He genuinely believed I lacked the business acumen to question his authority. That illusion shattered on a rainy Tuesday evening 8 months ago. Julian had left his personal laptop open on the dining table while taking a long phone call in the garden. I went to close it, but a mislabeled digital folder titled Miscellaneous Expenses caught my eye. Curiosity got the better of me. When I opened it, I didn't find household bills. I found intricate wire transfer records, offshore bank statements in the Cayman Islands, and shell corporations registered under names I'd never heard of. Julian wasn't just managing wealth. He was actively siphoning millions out of our marital assets and hiding them from federal tax authorities. My heart hammered in my chest, but I didn't scream, cry, or confront him. I knew that if I made a scene, his high-powered lawyers would erase the digital footprint before the sun came up. Instead, I quietly closed the laptop, placed it exactly as I'd found it, and made a decision. For the next 8 months, while Julian thought I was merely managing the house, I secretly documented every offshore account number, saved every fraudulent invoice, and built an irrefutable paper trail without raising a single suspicion. When Julian finally made his move, he did it with the cold precision of a predator who thought he had already won. I came home from work to find a thick manila envelope sitting on the kitchen island. No letter, no conversation, just formal divorce papers. Julian was offering me an insulting, bottom-tier settlement that barely covered 3 months of rent, along with a strict legal demand to vacate our family home within 14 days. By the next morning, the narrative was already spinning. Julian's mother was making calls across our social circle, painting me as an ungrateful, money-hungry spouse trying to leech off her son's hard-earned business. Julian himself sent me a short, patronizing text. Sign the agreement, Clara. Don't embarrass yourself in front of my lawyers. You have nothing. They expected panic. They expected me to cry, beg for a higher payout, or desperately scramble to hire a budget defense attorney who would easily be steamrolled by Julian's high-priced firm. But I didn't hire a lawyer. In fact, I filed my formal response to the court without contesting a single line of his initial filing or requesting a public defender. When Julian's legal team received my blank response form, they assumed it was a complete white flag. They walked away believing I was so thoroughly intimidated that I had surrendered without firing a single shot. Little did they know, my lack of defense wasn't a surrender at all. It was the final piece of the trap I had carefully laid for him. The air inside courtroom 3B felt suffocating, heavy with the sharp smell of polished oak and old legal ledgers. I sat quietly at the defense table, folding my hands over my worn leather folder. Across the aisle, Julian looked like a monarch about to claim his throne. His lead attorney, a seasoned lawyer notorious for crushing unrepresented spouses, adjusted his tailored cuffs and offered Julian a confident nod. When Judge Miller stepped up to the bench, the room fell into a tense hush. Julian's attorney stood up immediately, launching into a rehearsed opening statement designed to steamroll me into non-existence. He painted Julian as a tireless self-made entrepreneur and characterized me as a financial dependent who had contributed nothing to our marriage. He argued smoothly that I deserved zero spousal support, no equity in our home, and should be ordered to vacate the premises immediately. As his attorney wrapped up the scathing speech, Julian leaned across the table, caught my eye, and chuckled out loud to his co-counsel. "Look at her. She couldn't even afford a lawyer," he whispered, loud enough for the first 2 rows to hear. His brother let out a suppressed snicker, and even Julian's mother smiled in satisfaction. They were basking in what they believed was my complete and total public humiliation. Judge Miller raised an eyebrow, looking down over the top of his glasses at the sea of high-priced suits on Julian's side of the room. He flipped through the official court docket, paused on a specific filing, and then turned his sharp gaze toward the plaintiff's table. The judge slowly cleared his throat, the sound echoing through the quiet room, cutting straight through Julian's triumphant smile. Judge Miller didn't look at Julian's lead attorney. Instead, his gaze settled firmly on me. He adjusted his microphone and asked, "Will the lead counsel for the state's Financial Crimes Division please state her name for the record?" I stood up slowly, unbuttoning my blazer, and spoke into the microphone with absolute clarity. "Clara Vance, Senior Forensic Auditor for the State Financial Crimes Division, Your Honor. Appearing pro se today, not as a helpless dependent, but as a sworn officer of the court." Julian's smirk vanished instantly. For 3 years, he had dismissed my career as a simple office job, never once bothering to ask what I actually did at the State Bureau. "Your Honor," I continued, opening my leather folder and retrieving a bound 200-page dossier. "I am submitting a formal, sworn forensic audit report detailing systemic tax fraud, money laundering, and the illegal concealment of over $6 million in marital and corporate assets across 9 offshore shell companies." I walked across the room and handed 3 copies to the bailiff, one for the judge, one for the court record, and one for Julian's defense table. Julian's high-priced attorney grabbed the document, his hands visibly trembling as his eyes scanned the detailed bank account numbers, forged signatures, and federal tracking codes. The color drained completely from his face. He turned to Julian and whispered in a panicked, harsh tone, "What is this? You told me your finances were clean." Julian sat frozen, staring at me as if he were seeing a complete stranger. The courtroom went dead quiet. This was no longer an easy civil divorce hearing about dividing furniture. In a matter of seconds, it had transformed into an active, high-stakes federal criminal investigation. Judge Miller spent 10 agonizing minutes reviewing the forensic report, his expression growing darker with every page. When he finally looked up, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Under statutory power, this court immediately issues a complete freeze on all domestic and international accounts associated with the plaintiff, his business entities, and named shell corporations, pending federal review. Julian gasped, practically leaping out of his chair. "Your Honor, wait. You can't do this." That's my business. Sit down, Mr. Vance, Judge Miller barked, slamming his gavel. Furthermore, I am referring these files directly to the United States Attorney's Office for immediate criminal prosecution. The courtroom erupted into quiet chaos. Julian's lead attorney leaned over, desperately whispering to his client, "Julian, shut up. Anything you say right now will be used against you in a federal indictment." As the hearing adjourned, I packed my folder and walked calmly down the center aisle. Julian broke away from his legal team and cornered me near the heavy oak doors, his face pale and eyes wide with panic. "Clara, please," he stammered, his voice shaking.
"We can talk about this."
"We're family. We can work this out." I looked him dead in the eye, completely unshaken. "We were family, Julian, but you chose greed." Before he could respond, 2 federal agents stepped between us, presenting Julian and his terrified brother with formal grand jury subpoenas right there in the courthouse hallway. Walking down the marble steps of the courthouse into the bright morning sun, the heavy weight I had carried for 3 years finally lifted. Within months, the federal investigation dismantled Julian's web of shell companies. Forced into asset liquidation to pay millions in back taxes and penalties, he lost the sprawling estate, his prestige, and his business. Meanwhile, the family court awarded me full financial restitution and total ownership of my independent future. Julian assumed my quiet nature meant I was weak, oblivious to the fact that true power doesn't need to shout. It simply waits for the right moment to act. I didn't seek revenge. I sought justice, and in doing so, I took back the life he tried to steal from me. If you were in my shoes, would you have waited 8 long months to gather the evidence, or would you have confronted him immediately? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and click on one of the recommended videos on your screen right now for more gripping courtroom dramas. Thank you for watching.